For all his fame and celebration, William Shakespeare remains a mysterious figure with regards to personal history. There are just two primary sources for information on the bard: his works, and various legal and church documents that have survived from Elizabethan times. Naturally, there are many gaps in this body of information, which tells us little about Shakespeare the man.
Well, in 2004 we integrated ticketing in Southeast Queensland, so we introduced a paper ticket that allowed you to travel across all the three modes in Southeast Queensland, so bus, train and ferry, and the second stage of integrated ticketing is the introduction of a smart card, and the smart card will enable people to store value, so to put value on the card, and then to use the card for traveling around the system.
In animals, a movement is coordinated by a cluster of neurons in the spinal cord called the central contract patterns generator, CPG. This produces signals that drive muscles to contract rhythmically in a way that produces running or walking, depending on the pattern of pulses. A simple signal from the brain instructs the CPG to switch between different modes, such as going from a standstill to walking.
For many years, the favorite horror story about abrupt climate change was that a shift in ocean currents could radically cool Europe's climate. These currents, called the overturning circulation, bring warm water and warm temperatures north from the equator to Europe. Susan Lozier, An oceanographer at Duke University says scientists have long worried that this ocean circulation could be disrupted.
Financial markets swung wildly yesterday in the frenzied trading market by further selling of equities and fears about an unraveling of the global carry trade. At the same time, trading in the US and European credit markets were exceptionally heavy for a third consecutive day. London trading was marked by particularly wild swings in the prices of credit derivatives, used to insure investors against corporate defaults.
Brooke and her colleague Mark Newman studied who swapped messages with whom on a popular online dating platform in the month of January 2014. They categorized users by desirability using PageRank, one of the algorithms behind search technology. Essentially, if you receive a dozen messages from desirable users, you must be more desirable than someone who receives the same number of messages from average users. Then they asked, how far out of their league do online daters tend to go when pursuing a partner? I think people are optimistic realists.
Lowry is famous for painting scenes of life in the industrial districts of northwest England in the mid-20th century. He developed a distinctive style of painting and is best known for his city landscapes peopled with human figures, often referred to as matchstick men. He painted mysterious unpopulated landscapes, brooding portraits and the unpublished marionette works, which were only found after his death. Now that the story's been scratched, it is only part of contingency planning. But it was a symptom of the dramatic turn of events in South Australia, and it flushed out other remarks from water academics and people like Tim Flannery, indicating that things were really much worse than had been foreshadowed, even earlier this year. So is Adelaide, let alone some whole regions of South Australia, in serious bother? Considering that the vast amount of its drinking water comes from the beleaguered Murray, something many of us outside the state may not have quite realized. Is their predicament something we have to face up to as a nation?
Along the way we have built unashamedly beautiful buildings, two of which have won and another was runner-up in the prestigious United Nations World Habitat Award, the first time an Australian building has received that international honour. We rely on older concepts of Australian architecture that are heavily influenced by the bush. All residents have private verandas which allow them to socialise outdoors and also creates some defensible space between their bedrooms and public areas. We use a lot of natural and soft materials to build beautiful landscape gardens. There are some 250 million cars in America, 250 million cars in the country with just over 300 million people. And most of those vehicles, of course, are gas-powered. This poses a huge challenge given the limited supplies of oil and the growing urgency of the global warming crisis. But there is good news, according to our guests today. And that is we have the know-how and the technology to build sleek, fast automobiles that don't use gasoline. These vehicles of tomorrow are powered by hydrogen, electricity, biofuels, and digital technology. And they already exist. So what's stopping us from putting them on the roads? Our guests today will help answer that.
What is nanotechnology? Well, a report that was put together by a combination of the Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering that came out last summer, identified 2 topics. Nanoscience is the study of phenomena and the manipulation of materials at atomic, molecular and macromolecular scales, where properties differ significantly from those as a larger scale. Nanotechnologies are the design, characterization, production and application of structures, devices and systems by controlling shape and size at the nanometer scale. So I'll talk a little bit more in a moment about what a nanometer is, but loosely speaking, people think of nanotechnologies as being a sort of 100 nanometers or less.
These 2 paintings, both called sunflowers, are generally accepted as the finest of several depictions of the thick-stemmed, nodding blooms that Van Gogh made in 1888 and 1889 during his time in Arles. The first is now in the collection of the National Gallery in London, and the second is in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. Van Gogh referred to this work as a repetition of the London painting. But art historians and curators have long been curious to know how different this repetition is from the first. Should it be considered a copy, an independent artwork, or something in between? An extensive research project conducted over the past 3 years by conservation experts at both the National Gallery and the Van Gogh Museum has concluded that the second painting was not intended as an exact copy of the original example, said Della Hendricks, a professor of conservation and restoration at the University of Amsterdam, who was the lead researcher on the project. Dave Hackenberg, a beekeeper since 1962, can usually tell what killed his bees just by looking at them. If they're lying on the ground in front of a hive, it's probably pesticides, he says. If the bees are deformed and wingless, it's probably vampire mites. But last fall, Hackenberg saw something he had never seen before. Thousands of his bee colonies simply disappeared. He was in Florida at the time, pulling the lids off some of his commercial hives. To his horror, they were all empty. Rebuilding carbon-rich agricultural soils is the only real productive permanent solution to taking excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. She's frustrated that scientists and politicians don't see the same opportunities she sees. This year Australia will emit just over 600 million tons of carbon. We can sequester 685 million tons of carbon by increasing soil carbon by 0.5% on only 2% of the farms. If we increased it on all of the farms, we could sequester the whole world's emissions of carbon.
We've decided to adopt, just as a loose theme for the course, a biological theme so that you can see the connections between chemistry and biology and the things that you might consider doing in the future. We want you to think about the molecules that are relevant to your body, the processes that occur in your body, the chemistry that's going on, and how energy plays a role. And we divided the course into 4 sections, and after each section there will be a midterm. The first one, or an exam. The first one is about matter.
In February 2016, as infection moved rapidly through the range occupied by Aedes mosquitoes in the Americas, WHO declared that Zika infection associated with microcephaly and other neurological disorders constituted a public health emergency of international concern. By the start of February 2016, local transmission of Zika infection had been reported from more than 20 countries and territories in the Americas, and an outbreak numbering thousands of cases was underway in Cabo Verde in Western Africa.
Health education intervention programs are currently available to improve cognitive understanding of the importance of adopting certain dietary and physical activity behaviors and lifestyle choices. The aims of such programs are to improve health. The Coronary Health Improvement Project is a health education intervention that teaches people the importance of making better choices in nutrition, physical activity, and tobacco in order to prevent, arrest, and even reverse coronary heart disease.
The principles of integrated nursing advocate that food be considered as a primary intervention for health promotion, risk reduction, and generally improved well-being. Food provides information to the body, signaling basic biological functions and normalizing physiological processes. Healthcare professionals should query patients about their nutritional intake, recognizing that adjustments in the types of foods consumed can often address long-standing symptoms that create distress, including pain, fatigue, anxiety, and gastrointestinal dysfunction.
The Brazilian educator and influential theorist Paulo Freire has convinced me that scholarship is a dialogical process. According to Freire, the contributions of one scholar have no meaning if they stand alone. The value of any work becomes apparent only when that work dialogues with the work that has gone before. For this reason, we do literature reviews. For this reason, we include in our manuscripts an implications section.
One seminal difference in policy remains: the coalition has not matched what is Labour's most important innovation promise. That is to bring together responsibilities for innovation, industry, science and research under one single federal minister. Innovation responsibilities currently lie within the powerful Department of Education and Science, and while there is a separate industry department, it has little influence within Cabinet. This has hampered policy development and given Australia's innovation policies a distinctly science and research bias. It is the scientists rather than the engineers who call the tune in innovation policy in Canberra, so it's no surprise our policies are all about boosting government-funded research and later commercialising their results.
Milk production, that is, lactation, is a major component of reproduction in mammals. In contrast to all other animals, mammals including primitive mammals, such as the duckbill platypus and the spiny anteater, nourish their offspring with a liquid that is secreted by specialized glands. Milk production and secretion are complex, multi-stage processes that are controlled by several hormones, the most important of which are prolactin and oxytocin.
There are few studies on research training programs within the realm of Asian American health disparities. The existing literature on training programs tends to emphasize broad components such as mentorship and an examination of the community and academic partnership. Moreover, the current available literature pertains mostly to clinical practitioners such as nurses and doctors in residency rather than researchers. Few articles employed quantitative evaluation methods, because most of these evaluations were limited to a low number of participants.
Group-based microfinance schemes attempt to harness the collective power of mutual support, with members pooling their savings and making small loans to each other so that they can set up small businesses. Most aim to improve the economic power of and employment opportunities for women in their immediate community, and many aim to confront ingrained discriminatory attitudes to women. Some aim to facilitate the attendance of girls at school and change attitudes to the paid employment of women outside their homes.
The Czech Republic currently is undergoing transformation from the centralized regime of a communist dictatorship towards a modern democratic state. Fonda et al. Recognizes three main events in the last half-century that had profound consequences for the country and its land use. First, the communist coup d'état and the following collectivization of land in the 1950s that introduced large-scale collective farming. Second, the abolition of the totalitarian political system in 1989, which was followed by the restitution of private land ownership in the 1990s. Although Oikawa is much too young to have been directly affected by the expulsion of the Japanese Canadians from the Pacific coast, her anger at the treatment they endured during and immediately after the Second World War is apparent in the very use of the word violence in the title. Calling them euphemisms, she rejects such terms as interior housing centers and sugar beet projects.
The editors hold that if identity politics has no preordained political effects, then to a significant degree, the risks and dilemmas of identity politics signal not a failure of identity politics per se but a failure of states to democratize their political processes. They find this to be especially true of liberal democracies, where open political space for an engaged citizenry requires public institutions that possess the capacity, determination to develop procedures and guidelines for addressing claims in ways that are compatible with the rule of law, constitutional principles, and public reason.